October 2025. For 20 days, a California hunter wandered the Sierra National Forest with no food, no shelter, and no way out. Search teams thought he was gone. Temperatures dropped. Storms rolled in. And then, on day 20, a shadow moved in the trees, and a man the world had already written off stepped out alive. Stay with me, because this story is not for the faint. There are people who go into the wilderness seeking escape. And then there are people who go because the mountains feel like home. For a 60-year-old hunter from Yuba City, the Sierra National Forest had always been that second home, a place he knew more by scent and instinct than by map. He had walked these slopes in childhood, camped here in his 20s, hunted deer and quail in the crisp dawns of autumn, and moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone who understood its moods. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't inexperienced, he wasn't chasing adrenaline. He simply loved the mountains. It was supposed to be a one-day hunting trip, simple, routine, familiar. A quick drive with friends into the forest, a morning of tracking, and back home by sundown. The Sierra National Forest was known for its beauty, but also its brutality. Dense pines that swallow sound, canyons that drop suddenly into shadow, bears that roam the edges of clearings, mountain lions that pass unseen, and temperature swings that can turn deadly in hours. But he had been here before, dozens of times, hundreds even. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. The forest smelled like warm earth and pine needles. The wind brushed through the treetops in slow waves. Light spilled between the branches in bright, shifting beams. He moved with the steady rhythm of someone completely at ease in nature, boots pressing softly into thick soil, eyes scanning for signs of movement, ears tuned to the forest's background hum. If he had known what the next 20 days would hold, he never would have walked out of sight. But no one ever knows the moment their life quietly splits into before and after. Sometime in the late morning, he broke away from his group. It wasn't unusual. Hunters often separate to cover more ground or to get a better vantage over a ridge or canyon line. He spotted tracks leading downhill toward thicker brush. Fresh. Promising. He followed. The terrain shifted quickly. The forest thickened into tangled underbrush, almost waist-high. Fallen branches forced him to detour. The slope steepened under his feet. The air cooled. Then the weather turned. Fog, the kind that appears suddenly in the Sierra, rolled in like a slow, creeping tide. One moment visibility stretched for 100 feet. The next he could barely see 10. The trees blurred. The ridgelines disappeared. Even sound changed. The forest no longer echoed. It swallowed. He checked his phone. No signal, no compass app, just a blank, helpless screen. Still, he didn't panic. He had lost his bearings once or twice in his life, and he always found his way back. You stay calm. You pick a direction. You move deliberately. You trust your experience. But this time, the forest didn't respond the way it should have. Landmarks he expected to see weren't there. Rocks he thought he recognized weren't familiar. Every path looked like another path. Every tree looked like a twin to the one before it. He tried circling back, weaving toward where he believed the others might be. But each step into the fog made the world feel larger, emptier, quieter. The forest wasn't just hiding him. It was shifting around him, rearranging itself like a maze tightening its walls. Hours slipped by. The sun began to fall, and somewhere inside him, a thin line of dread began to stretch. By late afternoon, the fog had thickened into a cold, silencing blanket. Shadows bled together. The ground grew damp. The forest felt unfamiliar in a way he had never experienced, as if it were closing in. He drew a breath, steady and slow. Panic kills. He knew this. He had told other people this. He had lived by this rule for decades. So he calmed himself. He retraced his steps again, then again. But the forest gave him nothing back. He tried climbing to higher ground, a classic survival move. From elevation, you can orient yourself, find ridgelines, spotting trails or streams. He pushed up the slope, grabbing tree roots and exposed rock for leverage. Halfway up, the moss-slick stone shifted under his boot. His leg slipped. His weight dropped. A sharp pain shot through his knee. Deep, sickening, immediate. He fell to the ground, breath knocked out of him. When he tried to stand, his knee buckled. Injury. Not catastrophic, but enough. Enough to slow him, weaken him, limit him. Enough to turn lost into trapped. He sat in the dirt, the cold creeping through his clothes. He looked around, trees in every direction, stretching endlessly into fog. No sounds, no voices, no sign of his group. And then the most dangerous realization of all settled in. He could no longer self-rescue. The sun was dropping fast, and with it, the temperature. Night in the Sierra could swing from 70 degrees to below freezing in hours. His clothes were damp, his leg was failing, and he was alone. He forced himself onto his feet, leaning heavily on a branch for balance. He needed shelter, warmth, a place to make. He moved as best he could, stumbling through brush, scanning for even a shallow overhang or cluster of trees dense enough to block the wind. He didn't find much, but he found something. A fallen tree large enough to crouch beneath, its thick roots forming a crude wall. It was enough to survive one night. Maybe. Back at the trailhead, hours after he vanished from sight, concern turned into alarm. His friends called out into the forest, fired shots into the air, waited for any response. Nothing came back. They called authorities. By nightfall, the Madera County Sheriff's Office launched a search. Crews combed the forest's edges with flashlights. A helicopter swept overhead, its spotlight slicing through fog. No sign of him. On day 2, search teams expanded. Volunteers joined. Horses were brought in for deeper canyons. Still nothing. By day 3, authorities publicly acknowledged the truth they feared. The forest may have already taken him. They did not know that somewhere beneath a fallen tree, in the cold hush of the Sierra night, a man lay injured, exhausted, hungry, and about to begin the longest fight of his life. The first night felt endless. Cold crept into his clothes, his bones, his injured knee. Every shift of weight sent a pulse of pain through his leg, but he forced himself to stay awake. In the wilderness, sleep can be dangerous. Animals move at night, temperatures swing without warning, and a tired mind makes fatal decisions. He needed a plan. When morning finally arrived, he dragged himself out from under the fallen tree. His body was stiff, slow, shaking. But daylight meant one thing: action. He began building a crude shelter, nothing more than sticks, branches, and a patch of earth beneath a thick tangle of roots, but enough to block the wind and give him a place to return to when the temperature plummeted. Every movement hurt. His knee had swollen, tight and angry, but he pushed through it. He knew dehydration would kill him faster than hunger. He searched for water, listening for the faint trickle of a stream, following damp soil and small indentations in the ground. Eventually he found one, a narrow ribbon of cold, clean water slipping between rocks. He cupped it with both hands, drinking until he felt his body reawaken. It wouldn't make him strong, but it would keep him alive. Food was harder. He found a handful of berries, he recognized the edible kind, and scraped pine nuts from cones. He chewed leaves. On the third day, he ate insects, crunching through the disgust, because survival doesn't care about comfort. Every calorie mattered, but the hunger grew anyway, hollow and sharp. His leg throbbed. The skin around the injury reddened, early signs of infection. The pain crawled deeper each day. On day 4, he heard something that made his heart leap. A helicopter. The sound cut across the treetops in a long, distant rumble. He scrambled into the open as best he could, waving his arms, screaming until his throat burned. But the canopy above him, thick, woven, endless, swallowed everything. Not a single ray of light touched the forest floor. The helicopter passed overhead, close enough he could feel it in his ribs, but not close enough to see him. He screamed again, louder, but the forest replied with silence. By day 5, his voice was rough, cracked, barely more than a whisper, and the searchers still hadn't seen him. On day 6, the weather turned against him. Clouds rolled in quickly, bringing a cold, biting rain. His shelter, already flimsy, barely held. Water dripped through the branches, soaking his clothes, numbing his fingers. Hypothermia crept in slowly at first, a shiver that became a tremor that became violent shaking he couldn't control. He curled into himself, pulling dead leaves and dirt over his body in a desperate attempt to insulate. The nights were brutal. He faded in and out of consciousness, telling himself over and over, "Move, stay awake, don't freeze." Wildlife began to circle. He saw mountain lion tracks near his shelter, fresh, deep impressions in the mud. He heard distant howls at night. Sometimes he felt eyes on him, watching from the brush. He was no longer a hunter. He was prey. On the 8th day, another helicopter came, and another on day 9, and a third on day 10. Each time, hope surged in his chest. Each time the sound grew louder, then softer. Closer, then farther. A chance, then nothing. The forest canopy blurred everything from above. He was a small, shivering dot in an ocean of green. By day 11, hope felt like a memory. By day 12, it collapsed completely. He started talking to himself, whispering conversations to trees, to the sky, to invisible rescuers. He prayed. He bargained. He promised that if he made it out, he would never take another day for granted. But the forest didn't reply. Hunger began tearing him apart from the inside. His clothes hung loose on his body. His cheekbones sharpened under his skin. His stomach gnawed at itself in tight, painful spasms. He felt his strength draining with every step, not slowly but dramatically, like sand slipping out of a broken hourglass. By day 14, hallucinations began. He heard voices. His name, whispered gently, then urgently. He heard footsteps crunching leaves behind him. He saw flashes of movement that vanished when he turned his head. Once he swore he saw a rescuer standing only 10 feet away, a man in a bright jacket, motionless. But when he blinked, the figure dissolved into trees. He began leaving messages, carving short notes into pieces of bark. "Tell my family I tried. I didn't give up. I'm sorry." His movement became a crawl. His hands shook with weakness. His breath came in shallow gasps. Every thought grew foggy at the edges. The forest felt endless now. Not a place, but a world. One that kept stretching every time he crawled toward what he thought might be an exit. He no longer knew where he was or how far he had gone. He only knew that the mountains were winning. Somewhere outside the forest, search teams were scaling back. Authorities whispered what no one wanted to say out loud. He likely didn't survive. On day 17, the sky split open. A violent rainstorm tore through the Sierra, sheets of water pounding the ground, the wind whipping branches like whips, thunder shaking the forest floor. His shelter, weak, soaked, already collapsing, finally gave way. Water rushed downhill. The ravine around him flooded. His body was drenched in seconds, freezing cold. He tried to stand. His knee failed instantly. He fell into the mud, gasping, clawing for something solid to hold on to. The rain hammered him relentlessly. The forest roared. The cold cut through him like a blade. He pressed himself against a rock, shivering uncontrollably, certain the storm would finish what exhaustion and hunger had started. In the dark, he whispered through chattering teeth, "This is where I die." Morning broke like a thin promise. The storm had passed, but it left him ragged, soaked to the bone, shaking and half buried under a mess of broken branches and mud. He lay there listening to the forest breathe, to the wet hush that follows hard rain. He understood something plainly now. Staying meant dying. No more waiting for helicopters that couldn't see through the canopy. No more counting hours under a fallen tree. If he didn't move, the mountain would keep him. He rolled onto his side, bracing against the pain in his knee, and began to crawl. It was slow. Every push of his palms sent a shock through his shoulders. Every drag of his leg left a smear of mud behind him. He repeated the only words that still worked like a key in a rusted lock. "One more step." He said it aloud, soft and hoarse, a metronome against panic. Somewhere ahead, a sound threaded the silence. Faint, intermittent, then steady. Water. Not the trickle of the small seep he'd found earlier, but something bigger. He turned toward it, angling downhill, through ferns that slapped his face and slick roots that snapped under his weight. He slid twice, banging his hip. He fell forward into a tangle of manzanita, skin tearing on the rigid branches. When he stood again, his head swam, the trees tilting in and out of focus. Still, one more step. By late afternoon, he reached a narrow creek swollen by the storm. He dropped to his knees and drank until dizziness eased. He cupped handful after handful, feeling the cold climb from his throat to his chest, like the water was waking his heart. He washed the mud from his eyes, then followed the creek as it snaked along the canyon floor. Water meant a path, a line, a logic. People followed water, maybe rescuers did too. The light went gold, then gray. He kept moving, now a rough limp. Drag, plant, drag. He counted 50 steps, rested, counted 50 more. He spoke to the air as if it were a companion. "Don't stop now. Not tonight." When night finally took the trail, he crawled beneath a low root mass, teeth chattering, whispering that same thin sentence into the dark. One more step. One more step. At dawn, the forest exhaled steam. In a command post miles away, a deputy studied a set of fresh leads. A blurred shape on a hunter's trail camera. A partial footprint in soft soil where there should have been nothing but deer. It wasn't proof. It was a whisper with edges. But it was enough. The team from the Madera County Sheriff's Office redrew their sweep. They pushed a line into a narrow canyon they'd crossed off earlier. Too steep, too tangled, never a likely route. The storm had changed the ground. Maybe it had changed the man, too. They fanned out along the creek, radios popping, boots sinking into new mud. Overhead, the sky was clean at last, a hard, bright blue. They moved slower than yesterday, eyes working not for shapes but for breaks in pattern. A snapped twig that didn't match the wind, a scuff in the dirt that belonged to a boot, not a hoof. One rescuer stopped. Something shifted 30 yards ahead, behind a screen of young pines. It could have been wind. It could have been nothing. but it had a cadence, a rhythm, a human stutter. "Hold," he said, hand up. They listened. "Hello!" a voice called, thin and ragged, hardly more than breath. "I'm here. Please don't leave." The team moved as one, the first rescuer breaking through the brush, branches clawing his sleeves. At the base of a split cedar, a man sat half upright, ashen and shaking, eyes too bright in the dirt-smeared face. He tried to stand and folded immediately, catching himself with both hands. "We've got you," the rescuer said, already dropping to his knees. "You're okay. You're okay." The man's mouth trembled. He nodded once, and the nod was a collapse. 20 days of effort draining out at last, as if his body had been holding itself together only until it could see a face and let go. A second rescuer shrugged off a jacket and wrapped it around his shoulders. A third called coordinates, voice clipped and calm into the radio. Someone's hand found his wrist and counted the slow thud of a heartbeat. Someone else tilted a bottle to his lips, letting small sips return him to the world. He was dehydrated, severely malnourished, bruised from shoulder to shin. But his eyes stayed on their faces, not drifting, not dimming. He was here. He had made it to the word found. The helicopter came in tight and fast, thumping the air into the trees. When the litter lifted, he stared straight up into the clean blue, wind flattening his hair, the forest shrinking beneath him into a quilt of green. He whispered something only the medic heard. Later, they would say he just kept thanking people, apologizing for the trouble, as if he had done anything wrong. At the hospital, fluorescent light softened into something kind. Monitors beeped with reassuring regularity. IV lines threaded clear into the back of his hand. He slept in bursts, waking to faces that were no longer trees. A nurse leaning close, a deputy asking simple questions, a doctor pressing gently at the swollen knee. Then, finally, his family. Eyes red, voices breaking into laughter and tears when they saw him alive. Hands reached for hands, the room filled with air that felt new. A rescuer standing in the doorway shook his head and said what all of them had said at some point since the radio call. "It's a miracle." Another put it in numbers. Most people, in that terrain, in those temperatures, with that injury, would not make it past day 4 or 5. He'd tripled that, and then some. How? That question hung in the room like a second presence. He wasn't a superhuman. He hadn't found a hidden cache of food or a ranger's cabin. He had done what survival usually demands. The small things, over and over, past the point of sense. He drank when he found water. He built when he could build. He moved when staying still meant dying. He kept his mind from breaking by breaking it into pieces he could manage. A step, a sip, a breath, a word. One more step. Another question looped among the team. How many times had they flown right over him without knowing? The canopy had hidden him, yes, but there's a cruelty in that thought, a margin of rescue measured in inches of leaf and shadow. He might have heard them and believed that was the last time they'd try. He might have believed worse. But still he moved. He chose the creek, the canyon, the harder route he could not know they'd search again. Predators hadn't found him. Chance had spared him. Or maybe not chance exactly. Maybe the slow math of 20 days of correct small decisions paid out in breath. Reporters asked for comment. The sheriff's office offered measured praise, the kind you give when the facts are almost too clean to sound true. The family offered gratitude that came out like prayer. The man himself didn't say much. He didn't have to. His existence in that bed was the statement. When the press conference ended and the doors swung closed, the forest took back its quiet. The creek ran as it always had. The trail cameras blinked at deer and wind. Somewhere up a side canyon, the collapsed shelter darkened under another drizzle, a brief monument to what a person can build when nothing else will hold. There are questions no investigation can answer cleanly. Why did the fog roll in when it did? Why did the rock slip under his boot? Why did he turn left instead of right at the fallen snag on day 9? They're the cruel physics of wilderness. Tiny changes, big outcomes, lives remade by a degree here or a minute there. He was discharged eventually, thinner, slower, leaning into a pair of crutches. He stood outside the hospital at sunset and breathed air that didn't smell like sap or wet bark, and he smiled at the ordinary miracle of asphalt and voices and the fact that the sky can be huge without feeling like it's pressing you flat. The last shot belongs to the mountains. The Sierra National Forest in long, unbroken frames, ridgelines braided in shadow, the glint of water in a seam of stone, wind moving entire hillsides of pine like a single animal. A map too big for one person, too indifferent to bend for a single life. But not indifferent enough, this time, to erase him. For 20 days the forest tried to swallow him, but he refused to disappear.